Hey everyone, good day, good week, good almost end of our session together. So I'm talking to you Monday, just became afternoon, in our fifth and final week of Survey of Rhetoric. And in this fifth week, we are coming out of a week on culture, power, and culture. We talked about ideology, we talked about persona. And we're going to finish things off this session by looking at this kind of business of digital rhetoric, digital culture, digital tech, and try to thinking about rhetoric in relation to this very complex phenomenon. And so the goal for this week is to try to think again just a little bit, just sort of scratching the surface here, but want to be thinking about how it is that we can conceptualize digitality and all of the different places that digital processing and digital technologies have pushed over the last generation, 10 plus years, 20 years maybe. It's happened fast and it's been dramatic. And there's all these questions about like, how do we think about rhetoric in relation to our phones, the internet, the stuff that we are surrounded by in our homes, surveillance type questions, and intrusion, and this question of big data and so on, because this is so much about how it is that we conduct our everyday lives. Every moment we're grabbing for a device, it's helping us do something, it's learning from us, it's getting information, it's getting data. That data then becomes used by other entities, and it loops back around and affects us in particular ways. So there's a lot going on culturally, there's a lot going on socially, even politically, when we're thinking about digitality. And so rhetoric scholars need to be trying to figure it out, right? And so, rhetoric, going back to the beginnings, was always about speech, language, words, arguments, reasons, thoughts, speakers, audiences, but things have gotten so much more complicated, especially in the 20th century. And this course has charted in great leaps and bounds, has charted this movement from oral speech to think what we've looked at, right? We've looked at movements and public confrontation. We've looked at symbols and symbolic action, this question of narratives. We've looked at ideology and so on and so on. So the point is like, as the 20th century has progressed, and now we're in the 21st, we've seen a lot of evolution in terms of the human social capacity to influence, to reach, to impact, to move around, right? Now, if you're someone who thinks that is what rhetoric is that capacity to influence and to affect and to move, then you got to be looking at whatever it is that's doing that. Right? It doesn't have to be words. It doesn't have to be language. It can be other things. That's my approach anyway, is I'm interested in this business of how it is that humans move other humans socially, culturally, politically, using whatever means, right? So my research has been in food for over a decade now, because food is something that really moves us. And it moves us, and there's all this kind of cultural stuff that's woven into it. There's all kinds of persuasion that's woven into it. Even just the story of how it is that sugar has entered and increasingly invaded our grocery stores over the course of the last couple of decades, just my own lifetime, the story of cereal, the story of tomato sauce, and how it is that sugar has just found its way into more and more of our products. Sugar is persuasion. Unspoken persuasion. Sugar is one of the most tried and true forms of persuasion you can imagine. And it makes good sense that manufacturers would put sugar in food more and more and more, because then you get more and more people to buy your product. We got to be thinking about the consequences or the unintended consequences of a lot of this kind of stuff, right? So that leads us to thinking about digital technology, digital, social, mobile platform technologies, because this is how we live our lives, this is how we get our information, this is how we engage one another, this is how we accomplish tasks, right? So this morning I got a package, I got some coffee beans delivering from Canada. That's a little crazy. Our daughter lives in Vancouver, her boyfriend Jason works at this coffee bean place called 49th Parallel. They make really good coffee, and sort of to support Jason in his work, I have been ordering beans from 49th Parallel, which is a little goofy, right? Coffee beans. I shouldn't be ordering coffee beans from so far away. There's good coffee nearby. I'll do better about getting more local coffee. But it's interesting how, there's an app that I downloaded called Shop or something like this, and it offloads a purchase. When you make a purchase on a different app, it sends it to what's it called? I think it's just called Shop. Go to my utilities folder. It's just called Shop. And it's in charge of handling the delivery information, right? So all of these apps get chopped up into more apps, and the agencies that are in them are getting split and shared and pushed around. And so there's so much that's just sort of happening out there in terms of digital processing that services how it is we live. You order some coffee beans, you can track it, I'm looking for the FedEx truck out my window here, I can see down into the street. And it's just woven into how we live our lives, how we order things, how we stay current, right? But the point is of this week is to not be naive and just be thinking about all of this stuff as perfectly neutral. It's all just here to help us. No one's making any money. It's all just good, easy, convenient stuff, right? The point for this week is to be thinking about all of this stuff, this digital social technology, as rhetorical, which means that assumptions about how we live, norms about the way we ought to live, the way that we conduct ourselves, and especially values about what matters, what doesn't matter, what's included, what's not included. All of these things get written into these technologies because they're made by coders and programmers who are humans and who contain these values and norms and premises and so on. So these technologies that we use are also kind of using us. It's sort of like what Kenneth Burke said in his definition of man about language, right? Do we use language, or does language not also use us, right? We are born into language, and we are kind of governed by terminologies, by assumptions, by frameworks, right? Narratives, themes, myths. These things govern us. They kind of control us, even though we create them, but they kind of exist outside of ourselves, and in that way they also exert an influence on us. All of this influence business can be considered rhetorical. So we want to be thinking a little bit about digitality, or as Hallsby talks about here, the digital situation, by which he means the digital situation for rhetoric, for rhetorical scholars or communication scholars. There's a situation that we need to be kind of becoming aware of, and it's the digital situation. And he's referencing, with this situation business, he's referencing a very well-known essay in rhetoric called The Rhetorical Situation by Lloyd Bitzer. And that essay basically suggests that rhetoric needs to be thought of as situational, meaning that basically like problem solution, right? Rhetoric exists to address a problem, to address what he calls an exigence, like a defect marked by urgency, something that needs fixing, something that's creating tension or messiness or pain or suffering. That's a situation. And it's rhetorical if we, the people, potential rhetors, can address a problem using language, using symbolic means, using arguments, using appeals, whatever, to address and hopefully solve that problem using other people, using an audience or whatever. So the digital situation then is, and we find ourselves now in this really intense moment of digitality. The situation is we need to figure it out. We need to figure out how to think about digitality. We need to think about kind of like how to understand its rhetorical dimensions, and then how we can talk about positioning ourselves in relation to these things, right? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they helpful? Unhelpful? When do we distinguish? What can we do with them? What need we be careful of, right? These are some of the key questions here. So the untextbook chapter that we're looking at here, I'm again just wanting to focus on parts of it. So we're going to actually skip over the first part where he talks about the digital situation, and we want to focus on the second and third parts, but mainly the second part, keywords for the digital situation. The keywords here are algorithm and big data. Now, the other reading this week is by Ingraham, and he actually references it a little bit in this section. And so I think it's a really good and important essay, and one that we can look at a little bit more closely. because it's a useful way for us as sort of rhetoric scholars new to this phenomenon of digitality to kind of better understand it, because he offers these three kind of different levels. But let me back up. First of all, an algorithm, you've probably heard about algorithms at this point, or the algorithm, I'm getting the algorithm to work for me, or damn that algorithm, whatever. You're talking about how it is that things come across your feed. Why this video? Why that image? Why this meme? Why am I the intended recipient? The algorithm is this kind of mercurial, mysterious black box that lives inside of our devices and makes things appear and makes other things not appear, right? So this whole business of what comes across our screen, our vision, is really important. Because what we engage, what we see, what we attend to, the whole kind of economics and politics of attention are really important. Algorithms make things apparent. They make us subjects attend to certain realities, certain parts of reality, right? And they're meant to streamline the flow of information from source to recipient. They channel things, right? They guide and smooth and channel some information, some experience, some image, some video or whatever to me. How do they do that? Well, it's based on, the next key term is big data. It's based on big data. It's based on everything that these technologies know about me based on my prior behaviors, right? The thing about digital computation is its seemingly infinite ability to contain information, to house information, to store it, and then to use it, to discover patterns, to discover tendencies, and then to build and filter processes around these tendencies, right? So algorithm in here, we can think about algorithm as just a kind of a process or a procedure, right? Given certain steps, certain outcomes are more or less guaranteed. I tend to think of recipes as algorithms because I work a lot with recipes. And recipes are important. If you ever try to create a recipe, you realize that like every little step matters in terms of the final result, right? So given these specific conditions, this result will occur. Now, think about that in terms of our devices. Given everything that we know about Donovan Conley, because he has an interest in food, because he has an interest in Japanese knives, an interest in making espresso, because he watches these kinds of videos, anytime a new Japanese knife video comes along, it knows where to find me because of my prior behavior on the platform, right? So the big data services the algorithms, and of course the algorithms are engineered in such a way, right? Again, these are not neutral technologies. They are designed to channel certain inputs into certain kinds of places, right? So that's the kind of rhetorical business here that we should be interested in. Again, just to kind of repeat, we've moved from speech, words, language, arguments to like symbolic action. And now we're getting more interested in these subtler forms of influence. They don't necessarily even involve words. They're operating inside of our devices. They are creations of engineers and coders using math, using mathematical symbols, which I don't understand at all. But yet we see the effects of these things. We see the cultural impact that these devices have. Now, they enable us to do all kinds of insanely powerful things. I talked about agency last week. There's a lot of agency packed into our devices and all the different apps and places that we can go, functions that are built into them. There's so much capacity, so much power inside of these things. And it's clearly why we've all become so addicted and attached to them. And it's also why we feel so completely panicked when we're without it, right? My son lost his phone about a week or so ago coming back from camp. He left it on a bus. He uses music. He has crazy anxiety, and so he needs music in his ears to kind of drown out his own kind of internal noise, and it just helps kind of soften the anxiety. Without his music, without his phone, he's going wild. He's all over the place. Like, can't function, can't sleep, can't go out. There's so many different versions of that story for all of us, I would say, I get my news from these things constantly. I'm also, always watching videos on cooking or, again, Japanese knives, espresso, the things that I really enjoy learning about, cultural stuff, political stuff, right? So they're super wonderful and powerful, but they're not innocent and they're not neutral, and they channel us in certain ways. And the channeling and the funneling of our attention and our behavior produces certain outcomes, some consequences and unintended ones even, right? So now we're reckoning with the fact that, especially younger folks, sorry to say, but Gen Z and younger are the ones who have the first generation to ever have these extremely powerful smartphones from like birth, essentially. First generation to completely grow up with these things as part of your lives. When I was your age, when I was young, they didn't exist. The internet didn't even exist. It sounds crazy at this point, but yeah, the internet wasn't even a thing until I hit university. I was an undergrad when I first heard about email. I had a professor who had a little terminal in the back of her office, and we'd be in a meeting. She'd be like, "Oh, I got a new email. I got a new electronic mail." She's like, "You should try this service. It's really cool." And I'm like, "What are you talking about, electronic mail? I don't know what you're talking about." But I started kind of like poking my toe in the waters of the internet and so on, and it made no sense to me. Where am I right now? What's happening? What's going on here? That was the earliest phases of the kind of the public engagement with the internet, and then I watched, the original wave of phones that weren't smart. Texting took like hitting a single button 5 times to get a single letter. And then we got smartphones, right? And then we got social media. And this was all happening in the early 2000s. The smartphones, the social platforms, and then the economics of Silicon Valley shifted in such a way where big data and attention became like the whole game, right? Getting people more engaged more often was the way that you generated your revenue. And so engagement and attention have become the kind of the currency of our lives, right? We are always on our phones. We are always engaged. The question then becomes, how do these platforms keep us engaged? The algorithms are the things that are operating behind the scenes to keep us engaged, to serve us up certain kind of content that we essentially can't resist. We can't refuse it. It's too enticing, whether because it's so joyful, it's a video of my wife loves lying in bed giggling, watching like cute little animal videos, right? Those things are like crack to her. She can't stop watching, right? Because they're guaranteed to get her to pay attention and keep her on the platform. And then they can advertise. That's the whole business, right? Keep people engaged and then show them ads. And so that's where everyone's interests kind of align. But it's not necessarily good that we spend so much time on these things, watching stuff that's like, I don't know, maybe dumbed down, kind of simplified. Maybe it's a little harsh. Maybe it's a little crass. Maybe it's meant to kind of outrage us and get us worked up, get us angry, get us fearful, get us aroused in some way. So the ways of keeping people on these platforms so that you can get more data about them that advertisers can then use to access you to sell stuff. That's the whole kind of circular phenomenon, the circular economy of the digital world that we inhabit. And it's all happening through these things and through our bodies and our eyeballs, right? So we get the content, it keeps us glued. Advertisers then use that to send ads our way or to send targeted information our way. So that's essentially the sort of business of the algorithms is, again, this behind the scenes, invisible processing that's happening, but it's not neutral. It's not innocent. It is sending specific things in specific ways for specific purposes. So we can definitely think about this as a rhetorical phenomenon. I just submitted an article a week or so ago to a journal on this very topic. It's called Rotten with Prediction. Based on the Kenneth Burke essay where he talks about rotten with perfection, right? So, the argument I make is that what's going on with these machines and these algorithms is this attempt to predict human behavior. And if you could predict human behavior, then you could take advantage of it. What's more predictable than my wife wanting to watch another cute video of a cat or a red panda or whatever, right? What's more predictable than me wanting to watch another video of a cool Japanese knife maker or a really interesting technique for making espresso or improving my espresso shot, right? This idea of being certain of what it is that will engage, because when you have someone engaged, you can then dangle offerings in front of them, right? Targeted ads and all that. So the Chris Ingraham essay, I think, is a really good way of thinking about the rhetoricity of algorithms and how they work. And so we'll just sort of scroll down here on section 2. Gets into the macro, meso, and micro rhetorical. So obviously we'll get further into that when we actually go into the Ingraham essay, and I have a video already created for I think, persuasion class. So if I talk about Jenny Davis's affordance theory, it's because that's what we were reading in there. So you can ignore the affordance theory stuff, or you can go learn about affordance theory because it's super fascinating, but we don't need to know it here. But the macro, meso, and micro ways of thinking about algorithms are useful because, these things exert influence at both the micro, meso, and macro scales. And we just think about the difference between those three things in terms of scale, right? So micro is how it is that any given algorithm or platform or app that we're engaging with is working on me right now. So how the algorithms are designed to affect particular users in particular ways. It could be to get you to sign up for a really useful health benefit service or something like that. It could be used to get you to buy more candles, It could be used to get you really freaked out about what's going on with those guys on the political spectrum or those guys on the political spectrum, right? Doesn't matter. The point is we're talking about that kind of that one-to-one reaction between a user and the device as such, or the platform as such. The meso level is wanting to think about algorithms as a category, right? Algorithms as a kind of unique phenomenon. And you could talk about them across how they work across different kinds of examples. I think I talk about cars as my example in the other essay or the other video. And then the macro level is maybe what we would traditionally think of as the kind of the more rhetorical level, because here we're talking about kind of the cultural level, right? Now, it might be worth pausing here to just sort of talk about the distinctions between rhetoric of and rhetoric as, because, going back a few decades, rhetoric scholars, critics, would talk about the rhetoric of something, right? The rhetoric of women's rights, the rhetoric of propaganda. When we say rhetoric of, we're talking about language. We're talking about how it is we talk about women's rights, how it is that we talk about whatever, food, the rhetoric of food, the rhetoric of, right? And so there, our main focus is language, words, the word choices. Now, Hallsby does a fair bit of this early on when he talks about the digital situation. He's interested in language. How it is that kind of this phenomenon of digitality has entered our brains and therefore our language. We talk about leaks, right? We talk about connectivity. All the new kind of words, language, terminology that exists specifically to engage in and utilize these digital processes, that is the kind of rhetoric of approach, right? Now, I tend to take more of a rhetoric as approach, right? So we can think about food as rhetorical in the sense that even though there's no words in cereal, I mean, obviously there's marketing on the box, but think about the cereal itself. The cereal itself, I would argue, is a rhetorical phenomenon because someone in a boardroom decided our prices are down, we need to get more people, and specifically kids, to consume our product, so let's get more sugar in there. Let's get more fun things on the box, but mostly let's make this thing addictive. I see sugar in cereal functioning much the same way as these attention-seeking algorithms, because the whole point is to keep you engaged nonstop, to keep you eating cereal nonstop, right? And in fact, if you get into the critical literature, the scholarly literature on either food or tech, they use each other as examples of themselves, right? So the tech people use the language of food and sugar to talk about addiction, and the food and sugar people talk about screens and the addictiveness of screens as a way to talk about the addictiveness of their food products, right? Just so happens that my two interests at the moment are food and screens, or sugar and screens. I like to talk about them because we're talking about largely the same phenomenon. Screens are sugar, and sugar are kinds of screens as well. They operate very similarly in terms of rhetorical influence. So rhetoric of would be the kind of the macro level of language and consciousness, how it is that we think about digital devices, how we talk about digital devices, how our behaviors exist because of them, right? That whole kind of world of digital influence. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the viral phenomenon of the burnt Basque cheesecake. I've seen this a million times on Instagram, but again, because it knows I want to see it, it keeps sending them my way. The burnt Basque cheesecake. Basque is this, I was just there a few weeks ago. It's this northern Spain area, and it's a separate kind of cultural national identity. And they, in San Sebastian, there's this restaurant that created the burnt Basque cheesecake. And it became this viral sensation, this meme kind of thing. I've seen a million of them on Instagram. And so when I was in San Sebastian just a few weeks ago, I wanted to go try the burnt Basque cheesecake from the original place. I couldn't get in. There was lineups down the block. Why? Because of the culture of the influence, because of the algorithms that have been sending these images to people all over the world. And now we've got a sensation in our hands, right? So there's this weird looping thing where reality is now being shaped by the algorithms that are engaging us in certain ways. So that is the kind of the macro level of algorithmic influence. Let me speed up here. Big data is what you would imagine. I would just yesterday, in fact, my wife and I were driving. We went and got a new sofa at Costco, but we had to go to the one way out in Henderson. So we were driving back with these two huge boxes in the back of our truck. And we were like, we can't go on the highways. We got to go on Warm Springs. And we were able to take Warm Springs literally all the way from Henderson, all the way over to Fort Apache, which close to where we live now. And as we were driving, we went by on Warm Springs and like Decatur, and in between Decatur and Jones and Rainbow, in that area, there are these really weird looking buildings by the Switch Company. You guys familiar with these buildings? They're really interesting looking, but basically they are just massive data centers, right? So these are like, inside of these things are servers, data servers that are just humming along, processing billions and billions or trillions or whatever the number is of bytes of data, just like all the time, right? These things exist so that our devices can be sending us more and more pictures of Basque cheesecake or whatever have you, right? So big data is needed for the algorithms to sort through and figure out where to send information and where to send anyone who's looking for something. It's a way to kind of connect A and B. A is the user, B is the content that they're looking for. Now, there's lots of sort of nice, useful, sure do appreciate it kinds of sides to this. You know, it makes life easier, it gets you what you want when you need it, but then of course there are other sides of it, and this I'll just kind of wrap up by mentioning the third section in this chapter here on the kind of unintended consequences, digital dystopia and algorithms of oppression. These are just some of the like more unfortunate, ugly, sinister aspects of the channeling and the filtering function of these algorithms. We're talking about racism, we're talking about gender kind of discrimination, the fact that like all of these home voices are always women, and they sort of promote this servile kind of idea of femininity as being there to serve you. What can I do for you, you know? And again, the cultural norms, the values, the assumptions, these things get just packaged into these coding phenomenon largely without even thinking about it, right? It's just the way things are, and things get perpetuated, and they can get perpetuated in ways that we might not want them to be. They can get filtered down and simplified and reduced to their kind of most basic components in a way that we might not, that could be mildly off-putting or actually exclusionary and discriminatory to outright racist and violent and aggressive. I just saw an article in the New York Times yesterday about a woman who was unjustly arrested because some AI computer thought that her face looked like another face, right? These things make errors all the time. They don't have consciousness. They just kind of do what they're told to do. But those instructions and the processes themselves and how they shake out in terms of reality can sometimes be pretty scary and sinister. All right, almost 30 minutes already. This is a topic that I could go on at quite some length, but yeah, do take a look through this third section for these examples of the uneven, unequal, discriminatory kinds of results of algorithmic funneling and channeling, right? We'll get back into the Ingraham stuff in the other video, and I think I'm going to create an assignment based on the kind of the macro dimension, but I'll think that through a little bit more. But anyway, we want to be thinking about these really important phenomenon, digital phenomenon, from a rhetorical perspective, and these are some interesting ways of getting going on that. And be very curious to hear about your thoughts and experiences with this kind of stuff in terms of the rhetoric and the culture of influence surrounding digital devices, algorithmic processing, attention gathering, and all the rest of it. So hope everyone's well. Last video. It's been an enjoyable, quick run through this material. I hope you're kind of getting some good ideas and seeing rhetoric as this kind of important, powerful thing that's around us all the time. And I'm here to chat. So have a great final week, gang, and we'll see you on the boards. Peace.